Hello there and good afternoon. This is Al24 News stream live from the capital Algiers, and coming up next in our news program. Poland and Sweden co-host an international donors conference on Thursday in Warsaw to raise funds for humanitarian efforts to help war-torn Ukraine. Russia announced a 3-day unilateral ceasefire from Thursday at Azovstal steel plant in the Ukraine port city of Mariupol. Large groups of Zionist settlers stormed the courtyard of Al-Aqsa Mosque under the eyes and protection of the occupation police. An American central bank announced on Wednesday an increase in its key rates by half a percentage point. Hello again and welcome. Those were today's headlines. Poland and Sweden co-host an international donors conference on Thursday in Warsaw to raise funds for humanitarian efforts to help war-torn Ukraine. Poland's government says that Ukraine's needs are huge, despite funds already donated due to the large scale of damage from the war, and that millions of Ukrainians require urgent help. The high-level International Donors Conference for Ukraine, jointly organized by the Polish and Swedish Prime Ministers in collaboration with the European Commission and European Council presidents.
Our support for Ukraine has many dimensions, including the political alliance, military aid, but also the humanitarian effort.
With President Zelensky, we discussed the idea of a Solidarity Trust Fund to support Ukraine, and at our last European Council meeting in March, we decided to create this Solidarity Fund. And this is a concrete expression of our commitment to Ukraine together with the help and support of external donors.
In the same line of thought, Russia announced a 3-day unilateral ceasefire from Thursday at Azovstal steel plant in the Ukraine port city of Mariupol, while increasing bombardments from the east for areas near Poland and Hungary. Zara Forjani has more to tell.
On the 70th day of Russia's war in Ukraine, the last Ukrainian soldiers are resisting in the Azovstal steel plant, where, according to the mayor of Mariupol, intense fighting took place on Wednesday, despite Moscow's assurance not to launch an assault on this huge complex.
There is heavy fighting in Azovstal today. Our brave men are defending this fortress, but it is really difficult due to heavy artillery, tanks, aviation and ships. We also have to understand that the locals are there.
Russian Defense Ministry announced a 3-day unilateral ceasefire from Thursday to evacuate civilians from the factory.
Our military personnel are taking comprehensive measures to protect the civilian population for the safe evacuation of civilians from combat zones. Humanitarian corridors are open daily and ceasefires are declared.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine is ready to maintain ceasefire to continue evacuation of those trapped in the Azovstal factory.
We hope to continue rescuing the people of Azovstal. There are still civilians there. We must maintain to ceasefire to save them. The Ukrainian side is ready to do it. It takes time to get people out of those basements, those underground shelters.
The UN participated on Sunday in organizing the evacuation of 100 civilians trapped in Azovstal, the last pocket of resistance in Mariupol, the strategic city of the southeast, almost entirely controlled by Russian forces.
Russian forces withdrew from the vicinity of the capital Kiev and its surrounding to Belarus and western Russia in early April, and thus reinforced its force on the eastern periphery of Ukraine. But with this, Russian forces face a violent response from Ukrainian army. Sufyan Kanturi has more to tell.
Russia launched its military campaign in Ukraine on February 24th, but in early April, it withdrew its soldiers from the capital Kiev and its surroundings to Belarus and western Russia, bolstering its forces on Ukraine's eastern border. However, the Ukrainian army has retaliated violently against these Russian soldiers.
We have enough time to dig our trenches, conceal and await the enemy's likely advance. We will never leave these positions. Instead, we will hide and never leave, because their goal is to make us push back and then keep going.
Russia is struggling to make gains in its combat operation in east of Ukraine. Amid poor moral and logistical challenges, the UK ministry said on Twitter that the unsuccessful advances in northeast Ukraine pushed Russia to integrate and redeploy exhausted and dispersed forces. In eastern Ukraine, a group of soldiers occupy a series of locations across no man's land, about 4 to 5 kilometers away from Russians.
Currently, the front line is not moving. We hold our positions, hold them firmly, rigorously. We do not let the enemy approach us.
Analysts say both sides look ready to dig in for a lengthy fight that is showing growing symptoms of spilling beyond the battlefield in reaction to Russia's eastern push, which was hampered by staunch local oppositions and Western assistance.
Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu on Wednesday, May 4th, reiterated a warning that Russia would seek to destroy convoys of arms shipments to Ukraine from war-stricken countries, which in recent weeks have stepped up these supplies. Russia Defense Ministry said earlier that it had disabled 6 railways that stationed in Ukraine used to supply Ukrainian forces with Western-made weapons in countries east by bombing the power to the shipments which recent weeks have stopped. Russia Defense Ministry said earlier that it has disabled these weapons again. It was not possible to independently verify the claim, which did not say which Western-made weapons were supplied to Ukrainian forces via those stations. There were no immediate reaction from Kiev.
The United States and its NATO allies are continuing to pump weapons into Ukraine. I want to mention that we view any transport of a North Atlantic alliance arriving on the territory of the country with weapons or materials destined to Ukrainian army as a legitimate target to be destroyed.
Protesters for against and support to Ukraine demonstrated in the Bulgarian capital Sofia on Wednesday as lawmakers voted on how much support to give to the country in its fight against Russia's invasion. The two sides, one calling for increased support to Ukraine's government and another pressing for Bulgaria to stay neutral. Scuffled in front of monuments to the Soviet army, Bulgaria's parliament voted on Wednesday to allow repairs of Ukraine's heavy military equipment and seek ways to help Ukraine exports of grains and electricity, but circumvented proposal to provide direct military aid to Kyiv. US President Joe Biden said on Wednesday he would discuss possible additional sanctions against Russia this week with G7 countries.
With regard to the additional sanctions, we're always open to additional sanctions, and I've been in consultation. I'll be speaking with the members of the G7 this week about what we're going to do or not do, number one.
Russia's foreign minister on Wednesday announced sanctions against 63 Japanese officials, journalists, and professors for engaging in what is called unacceptable rhetoric against Moscow. The list includes Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, Foreign Minister Yukishima Hayashi, and Defense Minister Nobuo Kishi, among other officials. Sanctions bar the targeted individuals from entering Russia indefinitely, the ministry said. Tokyo had expelled 8 Russian diplomats in April in a rare move it said was in response to Russia's action in Ukraine. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said on Wednesday that European Union member countries that oppose an embargo on Russian oil will be complicit in war crimes.
If there is any country in Europe who will continue to oppose the embargo on Russian oil, there will be all good reasons to say that this country is complicit in the crimes committed by Russia in the territory of Ukraine.
Emmanuel Macron will discuss the war in Ukraine with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who is on a tour in Europe. calling for dialogue to end the conflict with avoiding condemning Russia. The Indian Prime Minister must be received at Elysee at 7 p.m. for bilateral meeting followed by walk-in dinner, said the presidency, specifying that this was his third visit to France since 2017, while Emmanuel Macron traveled to India in March 2018. President of the European Council, Charles Michel, has committed to increase EU military help to Moldova, a neighboring nation to Ukraine, where tensions are building after a series of explosions in a pro-Russian separatist territory. Michel stated that the EU will enhance its support in the fields of logistics and cyber defense, as well as strive to equip Moldova with additional military building capabilities.
This year, we plan to significantly increase our support to Moldova by providing its armed forces with additional military equipment.
Large group of Zionist settlers stormed the courtyard of Al-Aqsa Mosque under the eyes and protection of the occupation police who attacked the Palestinians, according to Palestinian sources. Palestinians are besieged by the occupation police inside and outside the Qibli Mosque. Palestinians were left wounded after attacks by beatings, sound bombs, and rubber bullets, and even dragging, in addition to the arrest of others.
The occupation soldiers are at the gates, as well as inside Al-Aqsa. What we ask of Palestinian people is to come at Al-Aqsa, and we ask the Islamic country and Arab to feel concerned about what is happening in this mosque.
North Korea fired a ballistic missile toward the sea of its east coast on Wednesday. South Korea's Joint Chiefs on Staff said about a week after Pyongyang vowed to develop its nuclear forces at the fastest possible speed. The launch was marked the North 40th known weapons test this year, comes days before South Korea's newly elected President Yoon Suk-yeol takes office on May 10th. Its last test was on April 16th and involved a new tactical guided weapon aimed at boosting the country's nuclear capabilities.
Our military detected one ballistic missile launched from the Sunan area in North Korea towards the sea of its east coast this afternoon. The ballistic missile flew for about 470 kilometers to a maximum altitude of 780 kilometers. South Korean and U.S. intelligence authorities are analyzing the details.
To a different matter now, the American Central Bank announced on Wednesday an increase in its key rates by half a percentage point, the first turn of the screw of this magnitude since May 2000 in an attempt to control inflation, which is at its highest in 40 years.
The Monetary Policy Committee raised interest rates to a range between 0.75% and 1% at the issue of a two-day meeting. Jerome Powell, the chairman of the powerful Federal Reserve, then clarified during a press conference that further hikes of half a percentage point would be on the table at the next two meetings.
Against the backdrop of the rapidly evolving economic environment, our policy has been adapting, and it will continue to do so. At today's meeting, the committee raised the target range for the federal funds rate by a half percentage point and stated that it anticipates that ongoing increases in the target range will be appropriate. We also decided to begin the process of reducing the size of our balance sheet, which will play an important role in forming the stance of monetary policy.
Powell did not give any indication on the rest without panicking Wall Street, which ended in the green. The Dow Jones closing up 2.81% and the S&P 2.99%. In March, the Fed had started to raise rates for the first time since 2018, but it had acted cautiously by raising them to a range between 0.25 and 0.15%, an increase of 0.25 points percentage. However, it had signaled its desire to mark 6 other increases this year, or as many as meetings by the end of 2022. Since then, inflation has continued to rise. Aggravated by the war in Ukraine, in March it reached a peak not seen since December 1981, plus 8.5% over 1 year, according to the CPI index.
The surge in prices of crude oil and other commodities that resulted from Russia's invasion of Ukraine is creating additional upward pressure on inflation. And COVID-related lockdowns in China are likely to further exacerbate supply chain disruptions as well.
The American Central Bank has two main missions: to ensure price stability and full employment. Powell repeated that with a very low employment rate, a shortage of workers, emissions by the millions each month, and plethora of job offers, the labor market was extremely tense and at an unhealthy level.
Consistent with the principles we issued in January, we intend to significantly reduce the size of our balance sheet over time in a predictable manner by allowing the principal payments from our securities holdings to roll off the balance sheet, up to monthly cap amounts. For Treasury securities, the cap will be $30 billion per month for 3 months and will then increase to $60 billion per month.
To attract candidates and retain employees, companies increase wages, which has the effect of fueling inflation. In addition to rising key rates, the Fed announced that it would start reducing its balance sheet as of June 1st, another major step in the normalization of monetary policy.
According to the State Department, the U.S. is currently prepared equally for scenarios in which 2015 nuclear deal between global powers and Iran is resurrected, as well as its proposed breakdown, following nearly a year of deliberation in direct bilateral talks with Iran to resurrect the giant comprehensive plan of action have reached a diplomatic statement. Court justice announced charges of assassinations and other crimes against Guinea's ousted President Alpha Condé, who was deposed in a military coup last September. According to a document provided to media by public prosecutor Alphonse Charles writes, Condé is one of 27 former high officials facing heavy charges including detention, torture, kidnapping, disappearances, rape, and other sexual abuse and looting. Colombian President Ivan Duque announced on Wednesday that Colombia's largest drug traffickers tunnel was exerted to the United States to face charges including drug trafficking and killings.
Colombia's biggest drug trafficker, Otoniel, head of the Golfo clan, was transferred on Wednesday to New York court in the United States. Wearing a bulletproof vest and a helmet, Otoniel arrived at an airbase in Colombia's capital, Bogotá, escorted by heavily armed police officers and a convoy of large armored vehicles.
Colombianos, quiero informarles.
Colombians, I want to inform you that Dario Antonio Soga alias Otoniel has been extradited. This criminal is only comparable to Pablo Escobar. He is not only the world's most dangerous drug trafficker, but also a killer of social leaders.
Sino de un asesino de líderes sociales.
The most wanted drug trafficker in Colombia was arrested on 23rd of October in the northwest of the country during a massive military operation. According to Colombian officials, Otoniel is responsible for the deaths of hundreds of members of Colombia's security forces, and he is wanted in the United States for crimes, including drug trafficking, conspiracy, and illegally possessing weapons.
Este bandido
The bandit was extradited to serve sentences for drug trafficking in the United States. But I want it to be clear that once he has served those sentences, he will return to Colombia to pay for the crimes he has committed in our country.
Otoniel's lawyers argued against his extradition, saying he should be allowed to testify before the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, confess his role in Colombia's internal conflict, and conducting illegal activities.
Today, legality triumphs, and I would like to thank the United States government and authorities for the diligent and fruitful work that has made this extradition possible, and that will also guarantee prosecution and severe punishment for crimes related to trafficking in drugs.
In 5 decades of war against drugs supported by the United States, Colombia has killed or captured several drug barons. And while violence related to trafficking continues, The country remains the world's largest producer of cocaine, and the United States is the main market.
The U.S. consulate in Cuba is resuming an issuance of visas after more than 4 years of closure for alleged health incidents affecting diplomats, at a time when the island is facing a migration exodus due to a deep economic crisis. The American consulate in Cuba had announced in early March a resumption of the issuance of visas in limited and gradual manner, but without giving a precise date. Abortion rights supporters gathered outside the U.S. Supreme Court in Washington to voice their concerns as America's highest courts prepare to reverse half a century of abortion rights. Hussein Burkan, what follow?
The Politico website caused a political explosion Monday evening by revealing, on the basis of an unpublished leak of an internal document, that the majority of the justices of the Supreme Court were ready to bury the judgment of Roe v. Wade of 1973, which protects the rights of American women to terminate their pregnancies. White House spokeswoman Jennifer Psaki qualified the decision as Republican and against the general opinion in the country.
They are at war with Mickey Mouse. They're against allowing women to make choices about their own health care, against lowering the cost of prescription drugs. And if that remains their platform, the president's view is that is out of whack with the mainstream of the country.
Following the same line, Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom promises to protect abortion rights in California, denouncing Republican efforts to target other vested interests.
At a time when countries around the world are expanding liberties, expanding freedoms, expanding rights, here we are in the United States of America about to roll back.
In turn, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell called the leak of the proposed Supreme Court opinion an attack on the integrity and the independence of the U.S. highest court.
The integrity and independence of the Supreme Court is once again under attack. And now we have, within the court itself, someone else threatening the independence of the court.
The Supreme Court proposed decision reversing abortion rights marks a triumphant victory for conservatives in the U.S. after 50 years of fighting to anchor their ideas at the center of American politics. Amid culture wars over feminism, race, and secularism rights led by the left, their campaign took off when Catholics and evangelical Protestants joined forces against the landmark of Roe v. Wade ruling, which since 1973, women's rights to abortion has been guaranteed.
Polls have opened in the local election with both major parties managing expectation as the Tory mayor warns Boris Johnson he will have to go further in helping people struggling with the cost of living. The result will be seen as a major task for Johnson and Keir Starmer, coming at the ostensible midway point of the UK government's term. A total of 146 English councils and all those in Scotland and Wales are up for grabs, as well as 7 mayoralties. In Northern Ireland, voters will also elect 90 members to devolved assembly in contest from which Sinn Féin could emerge as the largest party. Millions of Beijing residents returned to work on Thursday after the May 1st holiday, but many are working from home as dozens of subway stations are closed in hopes of stemming a persistent COVID-19 outbreak. In Beijing's central business district, there are few office workers seen as the streets are free from the usual heavy traffic. Hong Kong relaxed some of its COVID-19 social distance measures Thursday as its 5th wave of virus recedes. The limit on the number of people who can eat out together is now raised to 8 from 4. This makes a big difference for restaurants among the hardest hit business during the pandemic. Heavy rains and flooding have killed 22 people and 40 injured, damaged hundreds of homes and 12 provinces across Afghanistan, which has already been suffering from humanitarian crisis, drought, and climate change. Officials said that the Taliban government is struggling to cope with the disaster that has affected more than a third of its province and call for international relief organizations for help. Tornadoes were formed by severe storms across Oklahoma on Wednesday, inflicting considerable devastating Seminole County, roughly 50 miles southeast of Oklahoma City. Several structures entirely crushed and the streets covered with rubble, according to the Storm Prediction Center. The storm were part of severe weather system that was expected to strike sections of central and southwest Oklahoma into North Texas on Wednesday night. To this end, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. Take care of yourself and bye-bye.